The Little League World Series, Dreams on a Smaller Diamond. A story for baseball listeners about the heart of the game and the game of life. The summer heat shimmers off the perfectly manicured diamond at Howard J. Lamad Stadium in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where 12-year-old hearts pound with the rhythm of possibility. This is where dreams are born, tested, and sometimes transformed into something far greater than anyone could imagine. Picture this, dear listeners. Young players stepping into the same batter's box where future Major League superstars once stood, trembling with nerves and bursting with dreams. But here's the secret that makes this story truly compelling. The greatest victory in Little League isn't making it to the big leagues, but discovering that the real championship happens long after the final out is called. Chapter 1. The Road to Williamsport. The sun hung low and golden over East Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the weathered diamond at Lincoln Park. The air was thick with the scent of street tacos and diesel exhaust, but on this particular evening, it carried something else entirely: the electric anticipation of dreams on the verge of becoming reality. 12-year-old Marcus Mac Rodriguez stood on the pitcher's mound, his narrow shoulders carrying a weight that seemed impossible for someone barely 5 feet tall. Mac's parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, sat in the faded aluminum bleachers, their work uniforms still damp with sweat from rushing here after their evening shifts. Maria clutched her worn rosary beads, whispering prayers in Spanish, while Carlos gripped the chain-link fence with calloused hands that told the story of countless construction sites and late-night cleaning jobs. For them, Mac's blazing fastball represented more than athletic ability. It was a beacon of hope in their undocumented existence, a whisper of the American dream they had risked everything to pursue. The regional championship game hung in the balance. 2 outs, bottom of the 7th inning, runners on second and third. The opposing team's cleanup hitter, a cocky kid from San Diego with a reputation for clutch hitting, dug into the batter's box with a confident smirk. Mac took a deep breath, feeling the familiar leather of the baseball cool against his fingertips despite the sweltering heat. "Strike him out, mijo." Maria called out, her voice carrying across the field with the weight of countless sacrifices: every missed meal so Mac could have proper cleats, every extra hour worked to keep him in the league, every dollar saved from their meager earnings to pay for equipment they couldn't afford. Mac wound up, his motion fluid and powerful despite his slight frame. The fastball blazed across the plate at 73 miles per hour, remarkable velocity for a 12-year-old. The batter swung late and missed by inches. Strike 3. The East Los Angeles Eagles had won their regional championship, punching their ticket to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and the Little League World Series. As his teammates mobbed him on the mound in a joyous pile of dusty uniforms and ecstatic shouts, Mac's eyes found his parents in the stands. Tears streamed down their faces as they embraced, their pride and relief palpable even from the distance. In that moment, Mac felt the full weight of what this victory meant, not just for him, but for his family's future in America. "We're going to Williamsport, Mac." Coach Martinez shouted over the celebration. "You did it, son," but Mac knew better. They had all done it together, and now the real test was just beginning. 2,000 miles away, in the manicured suburbs of Minneapolis, a different kind of pressure was reaching its crescendo. Emma Chen crouched at shortstop, her ginger braids tucked beneath her cap. Her eyes laser-focused on the opposing team's final batter. The Minneapolis Metros clung to a 1-run lead in the bottom of the 7th inning of their regional championship game. Emma had grown accustomed to being the only girl on the field, to the whispered conversations in the stands about whether she truly belonged, to the constant need to prove herself worthy of wearing the same uniform as her male teammates. Every play was scrutinized, every error magnified, every success dismissed as luck by those who couldn't accept that talent knew no gender. Her father, David Chen, a quiet engineer with graying temples, sat in his usual spot behind the first base dugout. Beside him, her mother, Lisa, a bubbly real estate agent who had initially worried about Emma's choice to play with the boys, now cheered louder than anyone in the stadium. They had watched their daughter face down skepticism and discrimination with grace and determination, never once suggesting she should quit or find an easier path. The batter lined a sharp grounder toward the gap between second and third base. Time seemed to slow as Emma read the trajectory, planted her right foot, and dove parallel to the ground. The ball struck the very tip of her outstretched glove, and she snagged it with reflexes honed by thousands of hours of practice. Rolling to her feet in one fluid motion, she fired a strike to first base, beating the runner by half a step, out. The umpire called, and the Minneapolis Metros had won their regional championship. As her teammates rushed toward her in celebration, Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, certainly, but also a profound sense of responsibility. She wasn't just playing for herself or even her team. Every girl watching from the stands, every young female athlete who had been told she couldn't compete with the boys, was counting on her to show them what was possible. That was incredible, Emma. Coach Johnson exclaimed, lifting her onto his shoulders as the crowd erupted. Williamsport, here we come. Emma smiled and waved to the crowd, but inside, she felt the familiar weight of representation settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. She would be the only girl in the Little League World Series, carrying the dreams and aspirations of countless others who looked like her. Meanwhile, in the pine-scented humidity of rural Alabama, Ty Washington reluctantly positioned himself behind home plate as his team, the Sweetwater Swamp Dogs, clung to a one-run lead in the bottom of the ninth inning of their regional final. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to potentially catch the final out that would send them to Williamsport, the same tournament where his grandfather had been one of the first black players from their town to compete 40 years earlier. Big Al Washington sat in his customary spot behind the backstop, his weathered hands gripping the chain link fence as he watched his namesake prepare for what could be the most important moment of the game. The old man's eyes held a mixture of pride and expectation that made Ty's stomach churn with anxiety. At 72, Big Al was a legend in Sweetwater, not just for his athletic achievements but for the barriers he had broken and the dignity with which he had carried himself through decades of both subtle and overt racism. Ty's father, Marcus Washington, stood beside his own father, his arms crossed and his expression stoic. The Washington men didn't show emotion easily, but Ty could see the tension in his father's rigid posture, the way his jaw clenched with each pitch. Baseball wasn't just a game in the Washington household. It was a family legacy, a tradition passed down through generations of men who had used the sport to prove their worth in a world that often questioned it. The opposing pitcher wound up and delivered a fastball low and away. The batter made contact, sending a weak pop-up toward the first baseline. Ty threw off his mask and called for the ball, his voice cutting through the humid Alabama air. As he settled under the lazy fly ball, time seemed suspended. The stadium fell silent, 40 years of family history hanging in the balance. The ball nestled into his glove with a satisfying thud, and Alabama had punched their ticket to Pennsylvania. As his teammates rushed toward him in celebration, Ty felt a complicated mix of emotions washing over him. Joy, certainly, but also a growing sense of dread. Another step closer to Williamsport meant another step deeper into a legacy he wasn't sure he wanted to continue. That's my grandson. Big Al shouted from the stands, his voice carrying the pride of generations. Following in the family footsteps, Ty forced a smile and waved, but the weight of those footsteps felt heavier with each passing day. He loved his grandfather dearly, respected the sacrifices and achievements that had paved the way for his own opportunities, but sometimes Ty wondered if he loved baseball or just felt obligated to love it because of his family's deep connection to the game. As the three regional champions celebrated their victories in their respective hometowns, none of them could imagine how their paths would soon converge in Pennsylvania, or how the Little League World Series would teach them lessons that had nothing to do with baseball and everything to do with discovering who they were meant to become. Chapter 2. Welcome to the Big Stage. 3 weeks later, the chartered buses carrying the regional champions rolled into Williamsport like a parade of dreams made manifest. Mac pressed his face against the window as they passed through the small Pennsylvania town, marveling at how every street corner seemed decorated with Little League banners and welcome signs in dozens of languages. This wasn't just a baseball tournament, it was a celebration of childhood itself, a 2-week festival where the entire world seemed to revolve around the simple joy of kids playing ball. Howard J. Lamad Stadium rose before them like a cathedral of youth sports, its distinctive hill covered in green seats that could hold 12,000 spectators. Television trucks lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical sunflowers seeking the perfect angle to broadcast these young athletes' stories to millions around the globe. "Welcome to the show, boys," Coach Martinez said as the East Los Angeles Eagles stepped off their bus, his own voice betraying a hint of awe despite his decades of coaching experience. "This is what we've worked for all summer." Mac's parents had scraped together enough money to make the trip, taking unpaid leave from their multiple jobs and staying in the cheapest motel they could find 30 miles outside of town. As Mac unpacked his gear in the dormitory where his team would stay for the next 2 weeks, he couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at his stomach like hunger. What if the media attention led to questions about his family's immigration status? What if their moment of triumph turned into their worst nightmare? The media circus began almost immediately. Reporters with cameras and microphones seemed to materialize from every corner of the complex, hungry for stories about the young athletes who had traveled from around the world to compete on baseball's biggest stage for 12-year-olds. Mac Rodriguez, a reporter from ESPN, called out as the team walked toward their first practice session. "Can we get a quick interview about being the tournament's youngest pitcher?" Mac's stomach tightened, but he nodded politely. The questions came fast and focused on his baseball skills, his dreams of playing professionally, and his thoughts about representing Los Angeles on the national stage. No one asked about his family's background, and Mac began to relax slightly. Maybe he could just focus on baseball after all, but the attention was overwhelming. Scouts with radar guns appeared at every practice session, timing his fastball and taking notes in small notebooks. Television commentators began calling him the next great pitcher, and comparing him to legendary Dodgers ace Fernando Valenzuela. The praise should have been thrilling, but instead it amplified the pressure Mac felt to be perfect, to justify every sacrifice his parents had made. Across the complex, Emma Chen faced her own unique media circus. Every reporter seemed to have the same angle, the same questions about being the only girl competing in the tournament. She had prepared for this, rehearsing diplomatic answers in her head during the long bus ride from Minnesota. "Emma, how does it feel to be breaking barriers in Little League Baseball?" asked a reporter from the Today Show. "I'm just here to play baseball and help my team win," Emma replied with practiced grace. "I've been playing with these boys for 3 years now. To me, we're just teammates." But even as she spoke the words with confidence, Emma felt the weight of representation pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. She noticed the young girls in the stands wearing jerseys with her number, their eyes following her every move with the intensity of those witnessing history in the making. She couldn't let them down, couldn't show any weakness or doubt that might be used as evidence that girls didn't belong on this stage. The international atmosphere of Williamsport began to work its magic as the teams settled into their routines. Players from Japan, Mexico, Canada, Venezuela, and a dozen other countries filled the dormitories and practice fields. Baseball, it turned out, was indeed a universal language, and barriers of nationality, race, and even gender began to dissolve in the face of shared passion for the game. Mac found himself in conversation with a pitcher from Tokyo who spoke limited English but could demonstrate every grip for a curveball with perfect precision. They spent an hour on the practice mound, communicating entirely through gestures and the shared understanding that comes from loving the same craft. Emma discovered that the team from Mexico had a female assistant coach who had played professionally in her home country, opening Emma's eyes to possibilities she had never considered. Tyler Washington arrived in Williamsport with his grandfather by his side, Big Al's eyes bright with memories and expectations as they toured the facilities that had changed remarkably little since his own appearance 4 decades earlier. "This place still feels like magic, doesn't it, Ty?" Big Al said as they walked through the dormitories where his grandson would stay. Tyler nodded, but the magic felt more like pressure to him. Everywhere they went, people recognized the Washington name and wanted to hear about the family's baseball legacy. Tournament officials, other coaches, even parents from opposing teams approached them with stories about Big Al's legendary performance in 1983, when he had been one of the first black players from Alabama to make it to Williamsport, the Washington family. Exclaimed Coach Sully Sullivan, a weathered man in his late 50s who served as one of the tournament coordinators. Coach Sully had been around Little League for decades. His own minor league playing career cut short by a shoulder injury, but his love for the game never diminishing. "Your grandfather was something special back in '83. Made quite an impression on everyone here." "Thank you, sir," Ty replied quietly, feeling the familiar weight of living up to someone else's achievements. Coach Sully studied the young catcher with knowing eyes. He had seen this expression before, the look of a talented young player carrying too much expectation, too much history on shoulders that weren't quite ready for the load. "You know, son," he said gently, placing a hand on Ty's shoulder, "the most important thing about being here isn't living up to anyone else's legacy. It's about writing your own story." The opening ceremonies brought all 16 teams together in the stadium, and as Mac, Emma, and Ty stood with their respective squads, they felt the full weight and wonder of the moment. 12,000 people filled the stands, television cameras captured every angle, and somewhere in the crowd, their families watched with hearts full of pride and hope. The parade of nations was breathtaking. Teams from Asia, Latin America, Europe, and North America marching together under flags that represented not just countries, but dreams that transcended borders. When the announcer called out, "East Los Angeles, California," Mac's chest swelled with pride as he thought of his parents watching on television back home. When "Minneapolis, Minnesota" echoed through the stadium, Emma waved to the crowd with genuine joy, knowing that girls across America were seeing themselves represented on this grand stage. And when "Sweetwater, Alabama" was announced, Ty felt a complex mixture of pride and pressure, knowing that his grandfather was somewhere in the stands, reliving his own moment of glory from 40 years before. This was Williamsport. This was the Little League World Series. And for the next 2 weeks, these young athletes would discover that the biggest games of their lives had very little to do with baseball and everything to do with learning who they were meant to become. Chapter 3. When Dreams Meet Reality. The tournament began with the crack of aluminum bats echoing across multiple diamonds and the roar of crowds that had gathered from every corner of the globe. Mac's first appearance on the mound at LMAD Stadium felt like stepping into a dream that was simultaneously wonderful and terrifying. The lights seemed brighter than any he had experienced, the crowd louder than the largest gathering in East Los Angeles, and the strike zone somehow both larger and smaller than anything he had known back home. "Breathe, mijo," he whispered to himself, using his mother's favorite term of endearment as he wound up for his first pitch on the world's biggest stage for Little League Baseball. The ball blazed across the plate for a called strike, and Mac felt some of his nervousness melt away like ice cream in the California sun. This was still baseball, still the game he had fallen in love with on the dusty diamonds of his neighborhood. Mac's performance in the opening round was nothing short of spectacular. His fastball consistently hit 74 miles per hour, remarkable velocity for a 12-year-old, while his developing curveball kept opposing batters off balance and guessing. The East Los Angeles Eagles dominated their first 2 games, with Mac striking out 21 batters in 8 innings of work. The media attention intensified with each victory. Suddenly, Mac found himself being called the tournament's most promising pitcher by scouts and reporters who had covered Little League for decades. Former Major League players working as television commentators began making comparisons that should have thrilled any young pitcher. "This kid reminds me of a young Pedro Martinez," one former Cy Young Award winner commented during a national broadcast. "He's got that same competitive fire, that same ability to make his fastball look even faster than it is." The comparison to the Hall of Fame pitcher should have been the highlight of Mac's young life, but instead, it added another layer of pressure he wasn't sure he could handle. Scouts began showing up at every game with radar guns and notebooks, timing every pitch and documenting every movement. Mac started overthinking his delivery, wondering if this particular fastball would be the one that changed his family's life forever. The pressure reached a crescendo during their 3rd game, against a strong team from Texas that had been equally dominant in their opening rounds. Mac took the mound knowing that scouts from multiple major league organizations were in attendance, their presence adding weight to every pitch. In the 4th inning, with runners on first and second and 2 outs, Mac felt his control begin to slip. His fastball sailed high, his curveball bounced in the dirt, and suddenly the strike zone seemed to shrink to the size of a dinner plate. "Time," called Coach Martinez, jogging to the mound with concern etched on his weathered face. "I'm okay, Coach," Mac said quickly, not wanting to show any weakness with so many eyes watching. "Son, you're trying too hard," Coach Martinez said quietly, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "Remember why you started playing this game. It wasn't for the scouts or the cameras. It was because you love it." Mac nodded, took a deep breath, and delivered his next pitch with the same fluid motion he had used on countless summer evenings in East Los Angeles. Strike 3. The Eagles won the game, but Mac had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between playing with pressure and playing with purpose. Meanwhile, Emma's team faced early adversity that tested both her individual skills and her ability to lead under pressure. The Minneapolis Metros lost their opening game in a heartbreaking extra-inning defeat against a powerhouse team from the Caribbean. Emma had played flawlessly, turning 2 double plays and collecting 3 hits, but her teammates struggled with the magnitude of the stage and the intensity of the competition. As they walked off the field after the loss, Emma noticed tears in several of her teammates' eyes and realized that their Williamsport dream might be ending before it truly began. The elimination bracket in Little League is unforgiving: lose twice, and you're going home. Keep your heads up, she told her team in the dugout, her voice steady despite her own disappointment. "We're not done yet. One loss doesn't define us or our tournament, but privately, Emma felt the sting of defeat more acutely than her teammates could imagine. She knew that every mistake she made would be magnified, every failure potentially used as evidence by those who believed girls didn't belong in Little League at this level. The pressure to be perfect was exhausting, but Emma refused to let it show in front of her team or the media. In their next game, facing elimination from the tournament, Emma's leadership and determination became the catalyst for one of the most inspiring comebacks of the entire World Series. Playing against a team from the Great Lakes region, the Metros fell behind early, trailing by 4 runs after 3 innings. Emma gathered her teammates in the dugout between innings, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made her a leader despite being the youngest player on the team. "We've come too far to give up now," she said, looking each of her teammates in the eye. "We belong here just as much as any other team. Let's show everyone what we're made of." Emma led by example. Making a spectacular diving catch in the 4th inning to rob a batter of extra bases, then delivering a clutch 2-run single in the bottom of the 6th to tie the game. Her teammates, inspired by her determination and refusal to surrender, began playing with renewed confidence. They scored 3 runs in the 7th inning to win the game and advance to the next round of the elimination bracket. "That's what heart looks like," Coach Sully observed from the stands, watching Emma encourage her teammates between innings despite carrying the weight of representation on her young shoulders. "That young lady understands something that many adults never learn. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping others believe in themselves." Tyler's team had a different challenge altogether. The Sweetwater Swamp Dogs were winning games and advancing steadily through the tournament bracket, but Ty felt increasingly disconnected from their success. Each victory brought more attention, more interviews, and more expectations that he would follow in his grandfather's footsteps and perhaps even exceed Big Al's achievements from 4 decades earlier. The internal conflict reached a breaking point during their 3rd game, with Alabama leading by 2 runs in the bottom of the 7th inning. A routine pop-up behind home plate should have been an easy out for any catcher at this level, but Ty lost the ball in the bright Pennsylvania sun and it dropped harmlessly to the ground. The opposing team scored 2 runs on the error, tying the game and sending it to extra innings. Although Alabama eventually won in the 8th inning on a clutch hit by their shortstop, Ty felt the weight of his mistake like a stone in his stomach. He had let his team down at the worst possible moment, and worse yet, he had done it in front of his grandfather, who had traveled across the country to watch him play on the same stage where Big Al had achieved his own moment of glory. "It happens to everyone, son," Big Al said after the game, trying to console his grandson in the quiet space behind the dugout. "Even the best catchers drop a few. What matters is how you bounce back," but Ty wasn't sure he wanted to bounce back. The error had revealed something he had been trying to ignore for months. He wasn't sure he loved baseball anymore. The passion that had once driven him to spend hours practicing in his backyard had been replaced by obligation and expectation. He was playing for his grandfather, for his family's legacy, for everyone except himself. That night, unable to sleep in the dormitory despite his physical exhaustion, Ty wandered out to the empty practice field behind their lodging. The Pennsylvania night was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos and noise of game day. He sat on the pitcher's mound and stared up at the stars, wondering if it was possible to walk away from something that defined your entire family's identity. "Can't sleep either?" Ty turned to see Mac approaching, also unable to rest despite their team's continued success in the tournament. "Too much thinking," Ty replied, making room on the mound for the young pitcher who had become something of a celebrity in their short time in Williamsport. "I know what you mean," Mac said, settling down beside him on the artificial turf. "Everyone keeps talking about my future, about professional baseball, about changing my family's life. Sometimes I just want to pitch because I love pitching, you know." Ty nodded, surprised to find someone who understood the pressure he felt despite their very different circumstances. "My grandfather played here 40 years ago. Everyone expects me to carry on the family tradition, but what if I don't want to? What if I'm just not good enough, or worse, what if I don't even care enough?" "You're plenty good enough," Mac assured him, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned to see past statistics and scout reports. "I've watched you play. You've got great instincts behind the plate, and you handle pitchers like a coach. But maybe the question isn't whether you're good enough. Maybe it's whether you love it enough." The conversation continued for another hour under the Pennsylvania stars, 2 young athletes sharing their fears and doubts in the quiet darkness. They talked about the weight of expectations, the pressure of representing their communities, and the complicated relationship between dreams and obligations. By the time they returned to their rooms, Both boys felt a little less alone in their struggles and a little more prepared for whatever challenges the tournament would bring. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Game. As the tournament progressed into its second week, the intensity on the field was matched by the unexpected connections forming in the dormitories, dining halls, and recreation areas where young athletes from around the world discovered that baseball was indeed a universal language that transcended every barrier of culture, nationality, and background. The matchup between Mac's East Los Angeles Eagles and Emma's Minneapolis Metros was scheduled for primetime television, with announcers billing it as a clash between the tournament's most dominant pitcher and its most inspiring player. But for Mac and Emma, the game represented something far more personal than media narratives or television ratings. They met at home plate during the pregame ceremony, shaking hands as team captains while photographers captured the moment for newspapers and websites around the world. Mac noticed the quiet confidence in Emma's eyes, the same look he had seen in veteran players who had learned to thrive under pressure rather than be crushed by it. Emma, meanwhile, recognized something familiar in Mac's expression: the weight of carrying others' dreams alongside your own. "Good luck," Emma said simply, her handshake firm and genuine. "You too," Mac replied, meaning it sincerely despite knowing that only one of their teams could advance. The game itself was a masterpiece of Little League baseball, showcasing everything that made the sport beautiful at its purest level. Mac's fastball was working perfectly, but Emma's team had done their homework during their preparation, laying off his curveball and making contact when he was forced to throw strikes. Emma herself reached base twice, once on a perfectly placed bunt that showcased her baseball intelligence and once on a line drive that Mac himself acknowledged with a respectful tip of his cap. In the bottom of the sixth inning, with Mac's team leading 3-2, Emma came to the plate with 2 runners on base and 2 outs. The crowd was on its feet, sensing the drama of the moment and the possibility of witnessing something special. Mac wound up and delivered his best fastball of the game, but Emma was ready for it. She turned on the pitch with perfect timing and sent a sharp line drive toward the gap in right center field. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, it looked like the game-winning hit that would send Minneapolis to the next round. But Mac's center fielder made a spectacular diving catch, rolling over twice before popping up with the ball secure in his glove. The inning was over, and Los Angeles had preserved their lead. As Emma jogged back to the dugout, she caught Mac's eye and nodded with the kind of respect that only competitors who have pushed each other to their limits can share. He had gotten her out, but she had made him work for every strike, and both of them knew it. Mac's team held on to win 4-2, advancing to the semifinals while Emma's Williamsport journey came to an end. But as the teams lined up to shake hands after the game, something beautiful happened that would define the true meaning of their tournament experience. Instead of the perfunctory handshakes typical of youth sports, players from both teams lingered, exchanging genuine words of encouragement and respect. "You're the best pitcher I've faced all year," Emma told Mac as they met in the handshake line, her disappointment evident but her sportsmanship unwavering. "And you're the toughest out I've ever faced," Mac replied sincerely. "I've never seen anyone lay down a bunt that perfect under that kind of pressure." After the game, as Emma's team prepared to leave Williamsport, she was approached by a group of young girls who had been following her throughout the tournament. They wore jerseys with her number and carried baseballs for her to sign, their eyes bright with admiration and possibility. "Will you keep playing baseball?" one of them asked, her voice filled with hope and the kind of innocence that makes childhood dreams seem achievable. Emma knelt down to meet the girl at eye level, understanding in that moment that her impact extended far beyond wins and losses. "I'll keep playing as long as it makes me happy," she said thoughtfully. "But you know what? Whether I keep playing or not, you can. That's what matters most. You can do anything you set your mind to, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As Emma signed autographs and posed for pictures with young fans, she realized that her Williamsport experience had been about more than advancing in the tournament or proving that girls belonged in Little League. She had opened doors for the girls who would come after her, and that legacy would last far longer than any trophy. Meanwhile, Tyler's team continued their unlikely run through the tournament bracket, advancing to the semifinals further than anyone had expected when the tournament began. Each victory brought more attention, more pressure, and more expectations that Ty would not only match his grandfather's achievements but exceed them. The breakthrough came during their semifinal game against a powerhouse team from Texas that had been dominant throughout the tournament. In the bottom of the 5th inning, with Alabama trailing by 1 run, Ty came to the plate with the bases loaded and 2 outs. The crowd was electric, sensing the drama of the moment, and Ty could see his grandfather in the stands, hands clasped together in prayer. But as Tai stepped into the batter's box, something unexpected happened. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt genuinely excited to be playing baseball. Not because of what it meant to his family or his legacy, but because he loved the challenge of the moment. The chess match between pitcher and batter, the pure joy of competition, the simple pleasure of trying to hit a round ball with a round bat. The first pitch was a fastball down the middle, and Tai turned on it with authority and confidence he hadn't felt in years. The ball sailed over the left field fence for a grand slam, and as he rounded the bases, Tai felt something he had almost forgotten, the simple, uncomplicated joy of playing the game he had fallen in love with as a little boy. After the game, as his teammates celebrated around him and reporters asked about the pressure of living up to his grandfather's legacy, Tai sought out Big Al in the stands for a conversation that was long overdue. "I'm proud of you, son," Big Al said, embracing his grandson with tears in his eyes. "That was some swing. Reminded me of myself at your age, Grandpa."